The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
Welcome back to Generals and Napoleon. We have one of my favorite guests back on the line, probably the smartest guy I know, the great Jonathan North. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, John. How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Flattered.
Yeah, that's my intro. For those that don't know Jonathan, I've had him on the show a couple times. We discussed Murat and some other characters. We're going to discuss a famous Polish general today, Dąbrowski. Before I get to that, Jonathan has a great website that I want to call out. It's jpnorth.co.uk. I recommend my audience check it out. Jonathan, to the uninitiated, what can we find on that website?
It's mostly Napoleonic. There's a lot of stuff. I've been translating first-hand accounts, eyewitness accounts for the last 30, 40 years, and I try and put it all on the website. And we've got some, as we're doing a little bit of a Polish theme, I would say I've got about 3 or 4 books of Polish eyewitness accounts, anthologies by Polish soldiers of the Napoleonic Wars, and you can see how to get hold of them there. They make a nice little set, and it's quite an unusual angle, I think, so your listeners might find it interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Again, it's jpnorth.co.uk, so please give that a look. And yeah, today we're going to discuss a very famous Polish general who served Napoleon for a number of years. Definitely an interesting career, and like Napoleon, he is mentioned in the Polish national anthem, so he must have done something right. What is your assessment of Dąbrowski?
Yeah, he is an interesting character, and I would say he's not particularly well known outside of Poland, despite the fact he does feature in the Polish national anthem. He's a pretty solid, reliable organizer and administrator, which is probably why you don't hear that much about him. I don't think he was a dynamic leader, but he would be someone that you could put in charge of a garrison or a province, and you could expect good order and discipline and for the place to be well run. But from the Polish perspective, if you're Polish, he's definitely an inspirational leader and a man who is at the right time and the right place. Really helped keep the idea of Poland alive in a very difficult time in the 1790s, and even after under Napoleon. So he's definitely worth a look. And just to say about something we all struggle with, I think, which is pronunciation. Sometimes you see his name as Dąbrowski, like D-A-B, but we looked into it, and he is actually pronounced Dąbrowski, even if it looks like it should be Dąbrowski. It's something to do with accents, and I don't think we've got time to go into that today. But I've always said about Polish generals of the Napoleonic Wars, if you want a good, strong password for your internet banking, just use a Polish general. You'll be fine.
That's true, because they spell it differently wherever you see it.
There's some pretty tricky ones out there. We're not going to do the tricky ones. Dąbrowski's our man.
Yeah, well, I think he also gets a bit overshadowed by Marshal Poniatowski. And I think most people think of Polish officers, they think of Poniatowski first.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll come to that because there's a little bit of a rivalry between the two. They're very different people. So
yeah. Okay, well, getting into his biography, Jan Henryk Dombrowski was born in August 1755. And what was his early life like?
Yeah, so he's got quite an interesting background. And as you mentioned, he's born in 1755, which, of course, makes him quite old as a general in the later Napoleonic Wars, something we should bear in mind. But he's actually born in Saxony. His father was a serving soldier who was in the Guards. And his mother, sort of German-Polish aristocracy. And father was Catholic, and the mother was Protestant. So that's quite an odd thing at that time. They were sort of living in Saxony. There's a strong link between Saxony and Poland at the time, which we'll come to. But it's interesting to know that the family spoke German at home. So our general didn't really speak Polish very well, at least in the beginning. He went to military academy, Saxony, of course, very military place. So he had a proper upbringing.
Yeah, his dad was a colonel in the Saxon army. And oddly enough, our Polish hero doesn't start off in the Polish army. Starts off in the Saxon army. So what's his kind of first,
It's a classic kind of German aristocracy upbringing. He is sent into the army at a very early age. He's given a rank in the cavalry, and then he works his way into the guards. He becomes aide-de-camp to an important Saxon general, and then he sees some action in the very short Saxon war with the Prussians in Bavaria in 1779. So that's his first taste of warfare. It's a campaign, sadly, in which his father died. It was a rather brutal opening into the world of war.
Yeah. There's more in store for him, unfortunately. But by 1792, Saxon is at peace, so he seeks more action as a colonel in the army of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Without getting too deep into the partitions, what is happening to Poland at this time?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, there's a close connection between Saxony and Poland. So the rulers of Saxony had actually been kings of Poland until 1763. And that's when the Poniatowski family became kings of Poland, which, of course, Marshal Poniatowski will come to a bit later. And it's at that point that Poland starts to be partitioned between the great powers, Austria, Prussia, and Russia. And that first happens in 1772. Now, for a time, I mean, like we say, Dąbrowski's upbringing was at court, and he's mixing with the German aristocracy. And this is all a bit distant. For example, he does a lot of parades, he does a lot of training, does a lot of drilling. He goes to court and meets the king. I think there's an anecdote, John, you sent me about him getting his spurs caught in the dress of the elector's wife.
Yeah.
I was going to call her Queen of Saxony, but she's not. And pulling a dress and everyone collapsing in laughter. That's a sort of very different world. And over in the eastern sort of edge of Saxony, there's trouble brewing. Like I say, Poland first gets partitioned in 1772. But the family moves back to Poland in 1792, which is sort of going into the eye of the storm a little bit. And it gets very complicated. Polish politics at the time is incredibly complicated. You mentioned the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. We've got different bodies, we've got different authorities, parliament, kings, Saxon influence, Russian influence. And it looks like Dąbrowski actually sides with a pro-Russian faction against the pro-Prussian faction. But regardless, the outcome's the same. There's another division of Poland. And Dąbrowski actually gets arrested briefly for being sympathetic to Catherine the Great of Russia. So he gets actually thrown into prison for a while. And it's hard to keep out of the politics, even if you're a soldier.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a very fascinating story. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go into it now, but I mean, the Polish-Lithuanian state used to be one of the most powerful in Europe, and then it kind of slowly declined, and then its neighbors just kind of pulled it apart.
Yeah, it's a real lesson. It's a real lesson in bad government as well. So, yeah, we should do a whole episode on just that.
Maybe soon, my friend. But Dąbrowski becomes an expert in cavalry warfare and tries to modernize the Polish cavalry, correct?
Yeah, I mean, Poland's pretty famous for its cavalry. It's got a landscape, a terrain that's ideal for cavalry and sort of sweeping plains and all that sort of thing, important Poland. But because Dąbrowski was in the Saxon Guards, and Saxon Guards have got a great reputation for discipline and order, he's very admired for having got that experience and having been to the best academy in Dresden. And so he's given a cavalry brigade to drill and train. That's his first job really in Poland.
Yeah, in 1793 he becomes a general, and 2 years later he's captured by the famous Russian general Suvorov, but is well treated and later released. Is Poland just desperately looking for allies at this point?
Yeah, so the whole partition leads to a big rebellion in Poland in 1795, where a lot of the country rise up. And Dąbrowski was initially taken by surprise. He's an aristocrat, he's got good appointment, probably wasn't expecting this. But he does join in with the rebellion, and he has a short campaign fighting the Prussians in the north. But he's actually captured by the Russians, and yes, it's Marshal Suvorov that captures him and actually treats him very well and releases him. So he wasn't sent away or anything. Poland at this time, because it's being divided by its neighbours, the only real hope for Poland politically, and lots of them are starting to acknowledge this, even though they're aristocrats, is revolutionary France, because it's the enemy of their enemy. So France sort of beckons as a sort of light on the horizon. Like I say, even though 1795 in France is quite a radical scene politically. Lots of Polish officers quit Poland and make their way westwards.
Yeah, and you wonder though, the ideals of the French Revolution probably hit home to the Polish nationals, like freedom, equality, liberty, all that kind of stuff.
Those are the key ones, yeah.
Well, sure enough, Dąbrowski travels to Milan in 1796 and meets Napoleon, who authorizes him to create Polish legions to serve in Italy. And the Polish cavalry become some of Napoleon's best fighters, correct?
That's right. So Dąbrowski, after being released by Suvorov, he goes to Dresden, his old city, and then he goes to the Army of the Rhine, French army, and makes his way to Paris. But then he goes to Italy because there is this idea that the French will recruit Poles to fight the Austrians, and the Austrians obviously are in the Italian theatre of war. So he meets Napoleon in Milan. Napoleon's very taken with the idea. He admires the enthusiasm of the Poles, and he thinks if he recruits Poles who are serving in Austrian ranks at the time, then he will not only boost his own forces, but he will undermine Austrian armies as well. So the Polish Legion gets established, I think it's in January 1797. And in the course of the life of the legions, I think it's about 30,000 Poles serve, not all at the same time, but sort of pass through the legion. So it's quite a big body of soldiers. And that's why they get a mention in the Polish national anthem, along with Dąbrowski. And he's the organizer. The cavalry, like you say, the lancers are particularly famous. I don't think really lancers were that common. They're starting to be a bit common, but the French have really no experience of them, and they're very impressed with the lancers.
Yeah, I know they performed very well in Spain against the Spanish and the British, the lancers.
Exactly, yeah. So they went on to have quite a glorious career, and that all begins here in Italy. The Polish legions themselves, one of the things that Napoleon does to allow the legions to pay for themselves is he puts them in the employ of the Italian republics. It's the Italians who are paying for them, which is quite a clever trick. So you'll find that the Poles pass in and out of French service and Italian service, and depending on who's got the money.
Interesting. Well, in 1799, Dąbrowski is again fighting the Russians in Italy, but is involved in the losses this time at Trebia, Novi, but he distinguishes himself with courage. Was he promoted to general of division in the French army at this time, or is it the Italian army?
It's a good question. I would say the answer is both. You're right. Napoleon was in Egypt, and when Napoleon was out of the way, sort of the big Central European powers turn on France and seek to push them out of Italy. So the Austrians start up the war again, and the Russians come in and help the Austrians. So it's the Austro-Russians that invade Italy, and unfortunately the French are a bit stretched. They don't have the young charismatic general, but they put on a brave attempt to hold on to their gains. And it's Dąbrowski who's actually created general of division in French service in November of 1799. That's just after Napoleon's return from Egypt. So it's a kind of sort of consolation prize. You just about held on to northern Italy, but I'm back now. Here's a nice promotion. And of course, then Napoleon comes into Italy himself and wins at Marengo and chases the Austrians out. So you kind of finally push the Austrians out of Italy. but it's up and down for a while.
Yeah, in 1801, Napoleon signs a peace treaty with the Austrians at Luneville. Was this disappointing to Dąbrowski and the Polish troops? Because it seems to me they just want Poland to be independent again. But I think Napoleon realizes, like, in the grand scheme of things, I can't do that yet.
Yeah, I think that Luneville's a very interesting episode. And it's very disappointing for the Poles because it doesn't even mention restoring Poland. In fact, the Austrians had asked Napoleon as sort of part of the negotiations to disband the Polish legions because many of the Poles in those legions were Austrian subjects. And the Austrians were very upset, very frustrated, saying, you have to send these people home and make them quit French service. So there's the idea that Napoleon might do that in terms of a sort of bargaining chip. And you get a lot of officers resigning or protesting. And actually, you get a lot of Polish officers just going back to Poland at that time.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult time. They felt like they were being treated like mercenaries. They'd just been used. There's no sense that Napoleon was looking to do anything about Poland at that time. It's just too far away, I think, at that time. And then comes a really devastating episode, which is Napoleon's fault entirely. And that's he chose to send sort of the bulk of the infantry of the Polish legions to the West Indies. So he shipped them out to Haiti, where they were helped put down a revolt under Leclerc and Rochambeau. And that was a really cynical move. It was almost like he was getting rid of them so he could placate the Austrians a little bit. And certainly many of the Poles thought, Luneville and then Haiti, this isn't how we should be treated. So it's a very difficult time for Dąbrowski too, as commander of the legions, and a really, really hard time for the Polish sense of worth.
Yeah, and I know yellow fever killed most of that expedition to Haiti, so that's a good.
Yeah, very few of them came back. I mean, there's some examples of them surviving, but really they were wiped out. And interestingly enough, quite a few passed through. They surrendered to the British and passed into the 60th Regiment of Foot, which was largely recruited from German and Polish prisoners of war. And some of them were sent to South Africa. And so if you're interested in family history, there's a little smattering of Polish names in South Africa because Poles from Haiti ended up in South Africa. It's a very interesting area, but we don't have time, Paul. We should press on, Tom.
We have a lot of rabbit holes we can go down, folks, and we keep sidestepping them.
Well, that one is pretty...
That's interesting, yeah.
Pretty interesting.
Well, in 1805, Dąbrowski is serving again the French, this time Napoleon's stepson, Prince Eugene, and helps him in the War of the Third Coalition. After a successful conclusion of that war, Napoleon proceeds to smash Prussia in 1806 and move his armies into Poland. Is this the moment that Dąbrowski and Poniatowski thought, all right, here we go, we're going to get an independent Poland?
I think it pretty much is, yeah. I think 1805, Dąbrowski is feeling pretty much at home in Italy. I mean, it's quite a nice life. He does help Eugène de Beauharnais in the campaign against the Austrians 1805, and is involved in the invasion of Naples, 1805, 1806. But it's really news from the north that changes all that. So Napoleon, obviously, victor Austerlitz, then goes on into beat the Prussians, but the Russians don't quite give up. So the war transfers into Poland, 1806, 1807. And Napoleon sort of summons all of the Polish soldiers in his service to come and form the cadre, form the basis, the foundation of a new army that he's going to raise. And it is going to be raised for service of a Polish state. So it's quite it's obviously an exciting time for the Poles. And Dąbrowski, again, is given the task of organizing a division. I mean, that's what he does. It's sort of who you're going to call. We've got a division needs organizing. You call Dąbrowski, and there he appears.
It sounds like definitely a good organizer of men. What do we know of Dąbrowski's personal life?
It's quite hard to know a lot about his personal life, but we do know that his first wife died in October 1803 in Milan, Again, this is against the background of the Poles being sent to the West Indies. So it's a very difficult time for him personally as well. The couple had 2 children. They actually had 6 children, but 4 of them died in infancy, which is quite common in that period. But they had 2. The daughter, Carolina, she married an Italian general called Palombini, a general in Italian service. And the son, Jan, was happily married in 1803, but he was a general in Polish service in 1807, and he lost his arm in the 1807 campaign and had to retire. But he sort of came out fighting in 1809, and in 1812, he sort of did what he could as an administrator. And actually, the son Jan, he himself had a son called Napoleon in 1821. So that sort of little indicator that for all the ups and downs that Dąbrowski had with Napoleon, still there was a kind of lingering loyalty, even while Napoleon was dying in St. Helena. There's this little boy in Poland called Napoleon. So that's quite interesting. Dąbrowski, he married again in 1807. It's a good year for Dąbrowski, 1807. And he married into the Polish aristocracy this time. And they had 4 more children. So 1807, very much a year of success, particularly as Dąbrowski was rewarded with large estates. So one of the things that Napoleon did when he created this new Poland was he gifted quite a lot of land to those who had been loyal to him, as he did in Germany and Italy. So for Dąbrowski, this is a really good year.
Yeah, as you mentioned, 1807, the Duchy of Warsaw is created as a quasi-independent Polish state, but governed by the French. Probably not what Dąbrowski and Prince Poniatowski had in mind, but I also look at it from Napoleon's point of view, like, well, we're not just going to be off you go back to France, call us when you need us, because that'll upset the Tsar Alexander, who might just come in and take over your duchy as soon as I leave. So I can see it from both sides.
Absolutely. And if we remember that in 1807, Napoleon had just made a huge treaty with Alexander, Tsar of Russia, in which they'd entered into a formal kind of alliance. It probably wasn't the time to start pushing bigger Poland. But yeah, they do create this state, and it's largely created out of the lands that Prussia had seized from Poland. So it's mostly the Prussian bit of Poland. And Dąbrowski gets to be an officer in the Duchy of Warsaw's army. I always get a bit confused. A lot of people call it the Grand Duchy of Warsaw. Other people call it just the Duchy of Warsaw. And apparently the King of Saxony called himself Grand Duke of Warsaw. But in the Polish constitution, it's just Duchy of Warsaw. So you'll see both. It's written different ways by different people. Basically, it's just a rump. It's a small part of Poland that is made independent. And Napoleon can also use that as a bargaining chip. You know, if you don't behave, Russia, I'm going to take Poland, a bit of Poland, and give it to the Poles. And same with Austria. If you don't behave, I'm going to take your bit of Poland and give it to the Poles. So it's a kind of very clever political move, but doesn't satisfy people like Poniatowski, Dąbrowski. You're right. Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by The Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
No one should have to choose between their own safety and their pets. But nearly half of domestic abuse survivors delay leaving because they can't bring their pets with them. Purina is helping to create more pet-friendly domestic violence shelters through the Purple Leash Project, so survivors and their pets can escape and heal together. Visit Purina.com/purple to learn more.
Well, in 1809, Dąbrowski serves in the army of the Duchy of Warsaw and fights against the Austrians. How do the Polish troopers do in this one?
Yeah, so Austria takes advantage of the fact that Napoleon is down in Spain and thinks it can have a go at resetting the status quo in Central Europe. And they do invade Poland, do invade the Duchy of Warsaw. And the Poles, it's a young army. They do perform very well. They sort of have to abandon Warsaw, pull back. There's a kind of uprising. There's sort of formal fighting as well. They do manage to beat the Austrians, and there's this kind of stalemate until the war is concluded. But as a reward for their hard service, Napoleon takes a big chunk of Poland from the Austrians and gives it to the Duchy of Warsaw. So there is a payback there. Yeah. That's something called Galicia. So it's a province that was Austrian that they now give to Poland.
Okay. Well, 3 years later in 1812, Dąbrowski serves under Napoleon in the disastrous invasion of Russia. And like most of Napoleon's generals, he did not perform all that well. What happened at the town of Borisov, where Dąbrowski lost control over a vital bridge over the Berezina?
Yeah, it's not Dąbrowski's finest hour. In fact, it's nobody's finest hour, really, in terms of the French armies. Napoleon does invade Russia in June 1812, and it's something he calls the Second Polish War, almost as a sense that I'm going to take Poland from you, Russia. It's a huge invasion. As everyone's read, 650,000 men invade Russia. And Dąbrowski is given a division, one of 5th Corps divisions, and he's told to go to the south of the main army, secure Minsk in what is the capital Belarus nowadays, lay siege to a few of the Russian towns where there are big supplies, magazines and things. So it's not a very exciting task. And it went fine in the summer. But then in the autumn, as Napoleon starts to retreat from Moscow, bad news comes from the south that a Russian army that had been fighting the Turks was heading north and heading straight for Minsk, where Dąbrowski and his men are kind of based. And he has the task, really, of trying to defend the crossing of the big river, the Berezina, which Napoleon will have to cross if he wants to get back to Lithuania and Poland. And the bridge is at this town called Borisov, and Dąbrowski kind of digs in, but the Russians quite cleverly launch a surprise attack which chases the Poles out of the town, and the Russians burn the bridge over the Berezina. And that's why when Napoleon comes up to the Berezina in November, they have to improvise 2 bridges further north to get out of the trap. Dąbrowski, what else could he do? He was against much more aggressive, much more numerous enemy, and that's really his a difficult moment. His only real defeat, but it's a serious one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Napoleon did get out of the trap. Granted, he had to build a new bridge and lost a lot of men in the building of that bridge. So you're right; it was probably an impossible task for Dąbrowski to hold that bridge, but like you said, almost everyone except Marshal Ney had a lag in performance in Russia.
Yeah, and I think even those that we see as, having some kind of heroic moment, it was all against the backdrop of tragedy and disaster and defeat. Yeah. The fact that Ney kind of pulled some honour out of that situation does him credit, but everyone, no one was winning anything from Moscow to Königsberg. So,
well, in 1813, Dąbrowski and the Polish troops continued to serve under Napoleon in his fight against the Allies. Marshal Poniatowski is killed at the epic Battle of Leipzig. So is Dąbrowski now kind of like the de facto leader of the Poles?
Yeah, so after Russia, after 1812, Dąbrowski leads quite a few of the Polish survivors back into Germany, and he kind of tries to organize them, reform them in the early months of 1813. In Saxony, in Wittenberg, because Prussia changes sides, Poland is overrun. Poniatowski had gone back to Warsaw, but they couldn't hold Warsaw. So Dąbrowski in Germany is kind of the leader of the Polish resistance. And it all comes to a head at Leipzig, where Poniatowski is drowned. Again, another bridge gets destroyed, and it's another disaster. Poniatowski drowns in the river trying to get away from Leipzig. And so Germany is lost to Napoleon. And there are very few Poles left at that stage. But Dąbrowski is put in charge of them although he very nearly wasn't. For a while, Napoleon preferred a sort of more dashing young prince. This is something Napoleon does time and time again. But eventually, Dąbrowski is chosen as the Polish commander, and he then goes on into 1814 in the campaign in France.
Yeah, he serves under Napoleon all the way 1814, trying to protect France until his abdication, when he leads his troops back to Poland. And it must have been supremely humbling to serve under Russian Tsar Alexander, who controlled Poland now, right?
Yeah, so Napoleon abdicates April 1814. The vast majority of the foreign soldiers in French service have to go home. And Dąbrowski leads sort of 5,000, 6,000 Poles back to Poland. Now, what amazes me is just how generous Alexander, Tsar of Russia, was to them. He treated them very well. He honored them, encouraged them, he allowed them to keep their sort of the medals and their standards, and he incorporated them into a new Polish army. So although Alexander had made himself king of Poland, he did try and keep Poland autonomous in the early years. So it had its own army, and he wanted Dąbrowski to help reorganize that army. It's like, we've got a division that needs organizing, called Dąbrowski, and so there he was. Dąbrowski didn't just do that. He got a bit involved in the politics. He became a senator and a grandee. He was a big landowner in Poland, so he played an important role in that new government. So it wasn't as though he was punished and placed in some kind of
gulag or something.
Gulag or anything like that. It was very much feted and celebrated.
Well, I always thought about Tsar Alexander. I thought he was very magnanimous. Like, even when he entered Paris, like, he could have destroyed the city, but he told his troops to restrain themselves. And in this case, you're right. He could have thrown all the Polish troopers in the gulag or done worse, and he didn't.
It's interesting that the Austrians, they weren't as generous towards Poles that had served in French army. And you've got examples of them being placed in internal exile and things like that, and being sacked from from the rank of general and things. So you can do it different ways. I think Alexander's technique and ideas were admirable, and I think that was probably the right way to do it.
Agreed. Well, Dąbrowski retires not long afterwards in 1818. He dies of pneumonia at the age of 62. What do you think his legacy is?
Yeah, so he's quite old by the time of the end of the Napoleonic Wars, and he does retire because of ill health. As for legacy, because I'm not Polish, I probably have a different sense of his legacy. I think if you're a Pole, like I say, there's no doubt you would see him as a national hero that kept the flag flying. And I think many Polish historians, particularly nationalist historians, of which Poland's got quite a few, paint him that way, very much the heroic figure. But I think in many ways, you can see Dąbrowski as kind of reflecting the history of Poland itself. So he's initially in Saxon service, then he's in French service, then he's in Russian service. So depending on which kind of power was in the ascendancy, Poles are serving those people. So that's what your career is. Although there is a nationalistic element, definitely, there's also that pragmatic side that you have to get on, keep your career, and you have to obey whoever's in charge because you're a soldier. Yeah. So I don't say that as a criticism. That's the kind of oath that you take. And then there's the fact that the Poles themselves were horribly divided throughout this period. So we tend to follow the ones that went into the legions and see them as the only ones. Many different Poles had many different ideas as to what to do about Polish politics. And even those in the legions were constantly squabbling with each other. And we mentioned this kind of rivalry with Poniatowski. That's something that mars Dąbrowski's career. So Poniatowski is this aristocratic guy with a nice uniform and a great moustache. And Napoleon's really taken with him and makes him Minister of War. And yet it's Dąbrowski who's done all the hard work in Italy, and he's got the experience and can organise. And he sort of gets a little bit overlooked. There was an idea in 1805 that Dąbrowski might be made a marshal, which Napoleon rejected. In fact, it took him a long time to make Poniatowski a marshal, but Dąbrowski was sort of turned down for that position. We don't know if Dąbrowski resented it. Most of his letters were destroyed during the war, World War II, which is another Polish tragedy. But you can't help but feel that he probably did feel a bit overlooked, particularly in 1813, when he'd been through hell and back, and there's this younger, more suave prince gets made marshal, and you don't. So it's a difficult legacy, but it's bittersweet, I think.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess you step back and look at him. You know, he's this freedom fighter against impossible odds, and he was always at the forefront. And yeah, he didn't make marshal, but he made the national anthem.
That's true. So I think he gets the last laugh in that sense. He gets the national anthem. And I think also, you know, as a soldier, you have to cope with those frustrations. If you don't get promoted, but the general's son gets promoted, you can't stop doing your duty. And I think the main thing you should remember about Dąbrowski is that he did his duty. I think that's probably the conclusion I'd come to.
Yep, I agree. Well, thank you for that, Jonathan. I always appreciate your visits. Again, check out Jonathan's website. Really good stuff. jpnorth.co.uk. Really good information on there. I'm on it now. And we thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, John. It's a real pleasure, and hope to see you again.